everybody. Welcome to Sparkling Wine with me, Dottie Champagne. I am coming to you via the voice notes app on my phone this week, just because Mimosa, my dog, has decided to take a nap on my neck while we're both laying down here, so I can't even lift my head. You are getting, just some of the coziest audio I think I can produce. You may even be able to hear her breathing and wheezing and snoring eventually while I do this recording. So apologies if you don't like very gentle puppy breath. But, I actually like feeling like this. It's nice to be close to something that loves you so much. So definitely could be worse. But I mean, this is also, just indicative of my time management issues, that I have to do this recording right now. And I can't wait until she's done napping. Because as usual, I've left this to the last minute, just how I tend to do things, I guess. People tell me all the time that it's a creative thing, not being able to meet deadlines. But, I think this is just like a human thing. So many people that I know, they all struggle with it. We all procrastinate, whether you consider yourself a creative person or not. I honestly think that nobody really has good time management skills, that time management itself is kind of a myth. And, that's because I've tried, really, but, damn it if I don't always find myself scrambling at the last minute to get something done. I'm just not built that way. But, that's something that this week's guest probably knows quite a bit more about than me. Her name is Terry McDougall, and she is a career coach and author of Winning the Game of Work, Career Happiness, and Success on Your Own Terms. So we had an absolutely fascinating conversation about her life and how she's managed to get to where she is. As usual, we get into a bit of childhood trauma stuff. This one is quite heavy on that topic. So, I found it quite cathartic to speak to someone who's done the kind of work she's done and processed it so well. And honestly, I really admire Terry for how resilient she is and how open she was in our interview. And I think I'm going to have to start playing a drinking game during these interviews where I take a shot every time I mention my dad, because once again, we get into it. I found out recently that at least some family has listened, though not him. So I'm just bracing myself for the next wave of drama. Luckily, the family members that I know are paying attention are all chill, and, so they haven't come up. But shout out to you, Aunt Marilyn, for being super. If any of you would like a shout out or have questions or stories, really anything you think would be good to talk about on the show, you can send them to sparklingwinepod@gmail.com or submit a form at bit.ly/sparklingwinestories. I'm happy to keep you anonymous if that's what you like. I'm not here to publicly embarrass anybody but myself. And if you think your experiences might make you a good guest, you can submit yourself for consideration at bit.ly/sparklingwineguest. Or once again, send us an email. Slide in my DMs, whatever you want. You can find us on social media at Sparkling Wine Pod on most platforms. Twitter is Sparkle Wine Pod. I've been sharing lots of art and memes and fun stuff on there, especially on the Instagram. So go drop in and have some positivity in your day. We have, a little bit of a laugh if you can. Sharing all of these messages is really good for me. So I hope that you enjoy them too. And if you want to support the show, you can do so by joining our Patreon. That's patreon.com/sparklingwinepod. And all those links and more are in the show notes. So remember, you can always email us, sparklingwinepod@gmail.com for one last time. And, send us anything you want to share or just say hi. Just validate me with your attention. I do love that. So now get the shot glasses ready and enjoy my talk with Terry McDougall. I'm joined here today by Terry McDougall. Why don't you give our listeners just a little bit of an overview of what it is that you do?
Sure. I am an executive and career coach, and I'm an author of Winning the Game of Work. And before I became a full-time coach in 2017, I spent a long career in the corporate world as a marketing leader.
Fantastic. And so how many years roughly did you work in the corporate world?
30 years. It's hard to believe.
30 years, okay.
Yeah.
Was there a particular industry that you really focused in?
Most of my career was in financial services. I spent 21 years with two large banks. And it's funny because I was an economics major and initially when I graduated from college, I had absolutely no interest in financial services, but I had no idea what it was all about. And once I got into the industry, I realized that there were just a lot of really interesting opportunities and lots to learn. There's a lot more to it than what you realize when you're on the outside of those organizations.
Absolutely, yeah, and I know that it is quite like it can be a high pressure industry. My mother actually works in the finance world, so I hear an awful lot about it, like peripherally, but I'm not involved. So what was sort of like your impetus to get into writing versus working in that industry to begin with?
Well, I really, let's see, my last job, I was in it for 12 years, and I would say, actually, I should say it more precisely. I was at my last company for 4 years, and I had sorry. I was at my last company for 12 years and I had 4 jobs while I was there. And by the end of my time there, I was sort of looking around and realizing there really wasn't a lot there that I hadn't already done that was interesting to me. So it got me thinking about what might be a next best step for me. And I did what I now advise my clients to do when they're trying to figure out what's a good fit for them from a job standpoint. So I thought about what am I good at and what do I like to do? And as a marketing leader, I had always spent a lot of time coaching and mentoring my staff, which I love. I love doing that. I feel like it's a win-win-win because it helps me be better as a leader when people who are on my team know what they're doing and feel confident. And it's very fulfilling to help people grow and advance in their careers. So I knew I liked doing that, and I'd gotten feedback that I was good at it. So just with some things that were going on at my company, I decided to leave, and I was able to leave without having another job right away. And I decided in the time that I had to pursue a coaching certification. But also when I first left my job, I sort of, in some ways I needed to like process a lot, like you sort of are a bit in a box when you work for a long time because you're just, going in and doing what's expected of you. And sometimes you're sort of, in some ways sublimating parts of yourself. And so I said that when I left, I was sort of regaining my natural shape. And part of that process was I decided to start a blog, and I was writing about a lot of the lessons and so forth that I learned. And eventually that became the seeds of the book, but it wasn't an intention on the front end. Really somebody, kind of took note that I had been blogging for a while, for actually a couple of years pretty regularly. And he said, well, how many words do you have? Because you probably have enough for a book. And so that got me thinking. And then it just so happened that I figured out I had like 25 or 30,000 words, and another friend told me about a book writing program that she was part of. And I decided to join that book writing program in the summer of 2019. And by the spring of 2020, I had a little baby book that came out. It was, but it wasn't a baby. It wasn't too much of a baby. It was sort of like my oldest child. My oldest son was 9 pounds, 13 ounces when he was born. And the obstetrician said, oh, I should have cut the umbilical cord a little longer so he could be an even 10 pounds. But my book was 380 pages, which I had no idea when I was writing it that it was going to be that long, but I guess I just had a lot, a lot to say.
Lots of material there to work with, which is better than not knowing what to say, because I know I fall into that trap when I try to do my writing. So it's quite an achievement.
Yeah, thank you. It was, I'm proud of it. It is like my little baby.
And what did you find through working on that process that sort of like helped you with some of the more stressful moments, especially when you're looking at like in between and you're getting ready to put, when you're blogging, you're trying to put posts out, when you're writing your book, when you're trying to work on that sort of thing? What were some tools that you found particularly useful?
Well, I would say that in some ways, writing was sort of like therapy for me, because I think a lot of times when things are happening, you're just responding and reacting in the moment. And if there are any sort of residual feelings about it, a lot of times it's hard to figure out like what was going on, why, I had feelings about certain things that had happened and I couldn't quite figure out why. So I find by writing that it can really help put things in context. And, one of the really nice things about having the book is that I I really relay a lot of lessons that I learned either the hard way or I learned from mentors that I have and or had. And I actually refer a lot of my clients back to different sections of the book. And I find that when I'm teaching or I'm talking with my clients about these things, that I actually get an even deeper level of understanding about it myself, even though, believe me, when I was writing and editing the book, I was going cross-eyed, rereading the chapters and so forth and editing and all of that. But it is very interesting how there can be ever deeper levels of understanding when you keep reviewing sort of these experiences and truths from your own life.
Mm-hmm. So does the book have an awful lot of sort of tales from your own experience? Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a lot of tales from my experience. I also brought in some of my coaching client stories. They're told with, kind of pseudonyms, not, and sometimes it might be like a couple different people that are combined into a character in the book, but it's typically a pattern. It's based on patterns that I see. I also interviewed 11 people about their career stories because, when I was first, I grew up in sort of a blue collar family, and I was the first person in my family to go to college. So I was very ambitious about having a successful corporate career, but I didn't really have anybody that could guide me and in what to do. So I was always, studying and reading and so forth. And I know early on, I kind of assumed that people just knew exactly what to do if they were going to be successful, and that maybe they just kind of rose, they sort of had the golden ticket and they just rose to the executive suite. And as I've gone through my career, I've met a lot of people that have had very interesting careers. And I just decided to interview some of these people for the book. And what I found was that there were just like really great stories, and often, some really big failures. I mean, there were people that, had been fired multiple times, somebody who was elected as a judge and actually the first female circuit judge in a county, and I think it was in Alabama. And when she went to run for re-election, there was sort of like a cabal of people that were against her, and they were spreading lies about her family, and just like how completely betrayed she felt, and how she sort of rose from the ashes to actually do something that was even much more aligned with who she was as a person. It was almost like divine intervention, because the job that she got was so perfect for her. And it's not the type of job that there's probably like one of it, and it found her somehow. But I like telling stories like that because, I find them inspirational myself. And I also want people to understand that there's many, many different paths to get to what they decide is success for themselves. There's not, the name of my book is called Winning the Game of Work. And, one of the things I don't want people to think is that there's a cookie cutter, way of winning, because there's not. I mean, the subtitle is Career, Happiness, and Success on Your Own Terms. That is winning at the game of work. It's figuring out what your values are, what you want to get out of your career, and, pursuing success, but making sure that there's a healthy dose of happiness, that you have a lot of overlap between, being successful in whatever way you define it, but also leaving plenty of room for yourself. Because, man, I can tell you from a lot of people that come to me, they'll be, what I call successful but not satisfied, meaning that if you looked at their title, their income, the company they work for, et cetera, you'd be like, wow, they've got it made. They're really successful. And a lot of times they're really unhappy. And, what is the point?
Yeah.
What's the point of like, quote unquote, success if you're miserable? And, we see a lot of, the fallout from that a lot of times, that people are, abusing drugs or alcohol or overeating or overspending, or, they end up having relationship problems, maybe getting a divorce, or, not being there for their kids' special moments and stuff like that. And, there's, life is sweet. We deserve to enjoy it.
Oh, absolutely. And I know so many people, they have different stories about, like, whether it's somebody in their life or even with themselves where they're in that position. So it can be very difficult. Like, for example, my family, my father has been sort of a serial entrepreneur. He likes to build his own businesses while he still tries to maintain his own job. And like all of a sudden, everything can fall apart like that when you're in that position, right? So making sure you're doing it for you and for the right reasons is super important, because then success or failure, it's on your terms. So it sounds like your book would be a great resource for people who have gone through that, or are going through it currently, because as we mentioned before when we were talking previously, that you've been struggling with some personal things in your life over the last little while. So why don't we sort of come around to that? How are you feeling right now, and how have you been feeling over the last little bit?
I mean, I'm feeling fine now. I have, I guess in my adult life, I've really processed a lot of stuff that happened to me when I was a lot younger. And, it's kind of funny that when you grow up in a certain way, like if your family is a certain way, that you don't know that it's not normal. And if you don't feel right, sometimes you have a tendency to look at yourself and think that there's something wrong with you, rather than realizing that maybe there's something wrong with the environment that you're in. And that was a really valuable lesson for me to learn. And it took a long time. I mean, I'm still processing stuff, but, it really goes back to, my birth. My mom was 16 when she had me. She had to drop out of high school after 10th grade. She got married to my dad. He was a little bit older. He was 21. But my dad got a job, and the job required us to move around a lot. And then my parents, got divorced when I was 12 years old. We ended up moving someplace and my dad took a job where he did not have to move as much. And I think that was because of pressure from my mom, because they were having marital difficulties, but that just really wasn't enough. And they ended up getting divorced. And after they got divorced, I'm not really sure. I've thought about this a lot. A lot of the issues with my mom started becoming really apparent. And I think that maybe there were a couple things that were at play, and why it started really impacting me around that time. I think, first of all, being a single parent is tough. So I think that she was under stress, and she had a lot of sort of emotional instability. And so she would sort of fly off the handle and get really, she couldn't really, anger was an issue with her. And, it was really like walking on eggshells around our house, and you never knew what was really going to set her off. I also think that maybe when my dad was there, that he either like stabilized her or buffered that behavior from being apparent to me and my sisters. She had done some things when I was like a lot younger, but not with the regularity that she did, after my parents divorced. And then I also think being starting to go into adolescence, that it's just normal I'm the oldest, obviously, since she was so young when she had me. I think that it was really hard for her to deal with just the normal teenage rebellion. It's just a very normal part of growing up, right? To like start breaking away from your parents and setting up your own identity. And she really fought that. And I think really took it as rejection. And it caused me to feel really very guilty. And I have 3 sisters, and we've talked a lot over the years. I'm extremely thankful that I have the 3 sisters, because I think if it wasn't for them, I think I really would have been a victim of gaslighting, And I mean, because she did a lot of gaslighting, and I'm not sure if it was because she would dissociate when she got really angry, because it would be really weird. She'd really fly into a rage, and then she'd leave the room and come back 5 minutes later, and everybody else would still be, shell shocked about her behavior. And she'd come back in and act like nothing happened. And so I really wasn't sure if she didn't remember it, or if that was just her way, like, okay, if I have my head in the sand and I just deny that this happened, and then it never happened. And, but it was disconcerting, and it was definitely something that would make you sort of question your sanity. But having siblings, having siblings where we could just like look at each other and be like, yes, this is happening. This is real, right? Like we would just always say, she's crazy. She's crazy. And it's a really tough thing to have a parent who is so unpredictable that way, because, you have to rely on them to care for you. But yet I didn't trust her, because I just didn't know if, I really wouldn't go to her with much unless I really had to, because I just never knew what would sort of set her off. And she could be extremely loving when she wanted to be. There's a lot of great things about my mom, but boy, when somebody is abusive in the way that she was, and it took me a really long time to come around to call it abuse. But I recognize now that it was emotional and verbal abuse. And maybe a little bit of physical abuse, nothing like she slapped me across the face and held me down and stuff like that, but not anything that was like pervasive, But it really, the thing that was the worst was just the fear of like, okay, what's going to set her off? But I learned to be very self-sufficient, and I'm proud of myself for that. But I also, I realize now that I think I had post-traumatic stress disorder when I left. And I was pretty functional in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways I wasn't. I was afraid I had friends, but I would never be the first person that would reach out to somebody to strike up a friendship, because I just was really afraid of rejection. I really felt like somebody would have, and especially with women, I felt like, my dad was not like very emotional at all. And he pretty much was like, what you see is what you get. So he, in a lot of ways, he was sort of like the opposite of my mom. He didn't really like proactively like care for me and my sisters in the same way that my mom did. But I also was sort of like, well, I know that he's never going to like hurt me. He's never he's pretty steady. And I just appreciated that he would sort of like just leave me alone, and I didn't have to worry about him doing anything, that I didn't have to like worry.
He wasn't the trigger for any of it. Yeah,
he wasn't. But I became like really hyper vigilant in so many areas of my life. And it took me a long time to, I guess, first of all, recognize it, because, like I said, when you grow up with something like that, it just becomes the air that you breathe and the water that that you bathe in. It's the ground that you're planted in. You just don't know that there's anything else besides that. But I did observe other people, and I'd be like, gosh, how can they go into these situations so carefree? How can they be so like young and crazy? Like I just was always like, not, this isn't literal, but like looking for the exit, like where's the nearest exit, right? Like I was always thinking like 3 steps ahead.
Just being ready to jump out of it.
Yes, being ready. And, and I recognize now it's because I still had that sort of like almost viscerally in my body, right? And so just there's a ton of stuff that I did over the years to try to heal from that. Everything, therapy, and I went on a week-long retreat where we did all of these like processing. We talked a lot and did lots of exercises about what it was like for our parents, right? To like learn how to have more empathy for them and to forgive them. And that helped. That actually helped a lot, even though, you know, I was really angry for so long about how my mom treated me and how I always felt like I would try. I mean, I was trying from like childhood to like bolster her because, and I realize now, I didn't realize it really as a child why I was doing that. But when I look back, I think it was because I was like, okay, well, if she gets her needs met, maybe I'll get my needs met. Like maybe if she feels more secure, maybe she'll care for me, you know? And I look back now and I just, you know, at some point I had this realization, which was I deserve a loving mom, but it's not a good idea for me to go to that particular person and look for that. And that was a really big eye opener for me because I think before I kind of thought that if I wasn't getting the love from her, that I didn't deserve it. And that wasn't the case at all. I did deserve it. But, you know, every time that I would go and I wouldn't get the like response that I wanted from her, you know, I would just feel like I got kicked in the gut again. And she was pretty manipulative too, in terms of, you know, she always wanted to have like one of her children sort of under her thumb in a way. And she would do a lot to sort of, it's almost like seducing, like, you know, be really, really nice and like do really nice things to sort of like, I always thought of it as like the Black Widow luring somebody into the web. and then when you got close enough and then she'd grab you and bind you up and then you were at her mercy. And I just had a few too many of the like figurative, you know, roundhouse, you know, or uppercuts to the jaw from her that, you know, I got too close and she would just turn. And I was like, the hell with that. I'm not doing that anymore. So I broke ties with her a long time ago. I mean, I've a couple times, like 2 or 3 times I tried to get back together with her, but it actually was very upsetting for her and it was upsetting for me. And so I just decided that it was better if I preserved my energy for myself. I mean, I'm married and I've got 3 kids and I actually sort of started breaking away from her and started cutting the ties when my first son was born. And I remember at the time, like really realizing that it was about energy, that, you know, she was, I mean, maybe you've heard of like emotional vampires. And I hate, but it really was, you know, she was really, I really feel like she's got sort of like a bit of a vacuum and she's looking for somebody else to fill it. I think it's a little bit of like a shaky self-image and that she wants people to be around her to kind of reflect back to her that she's okay. But, you know, you can't do that to your kids. You know, like if you're doing it with another adult and they agree that that person,
that's like their choice
right.
to be
but
in that situation.
To do that, I mean, I really felt like I was carrying a heavy enough burden just trying to grow up and kind of, you know, keep her kind of boosted up. And then just when I got to adulthood and I, you know, found a nice husband and had a beautiful little baby. And I was still feeling sort of drained by some of her antics. And I just had a moment once that I just woke up and I kind of like saw in really stark relief what was going on. And I was like, the heck with this. I got a beautiful life here and I'm just going to like shut this off so that I can really focus my energy on this life and on healing. And it was really one of the best things that I ever did in my life. And, you know, I was still angry and I was still anxious and that for a long time. But, you know, it's been a journey for sure. But I feel like I've released a lot of that. I really feel like actually a lot of that bad energy was sort of trapped in my body and maybe sort of in my psyche. And I actually started going to a Reiki healer a few years ago. And even though I was a little skeptical, it was really sort of miraculous how she was able to, you know, sense where I had trapped energy, and it, like, the release of it has been like amazing. I mean, really, I feel I'm able to be really centered and just be myself. And before, I just always, I always felt like sort of on edge and a bit anxious and hypervigilant.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, when you've got a parent like that in your life, especially growing up, it just becomes such a learned habit. Like, I know myself, I find a lot of people, it's not talked about enough how there are, for a lot of people, at least one parent in their life that's at least to some extent like that. Like in my life, it's flipped them. It was my father. My mother was the more stable one. And I'm still working today to try to like figure out what that relationship is. Right. I mean, just the other evening I was having a conversation with him, and he's always trying to just pull me into whatever his next big scheme is or whatever his thing is. Right. And I find myself just so often trapped almost by whatever. It's like I don't have value to him unless I'm actively participating in his business or in his scheme. Yes, exactly. Right. Like even with this show I started, he heard I was starting a show and he was like, oh, great. Okay. How can I latch onto this show you're doing and have you do it for me? So, you know, these things happen. But yeah, I think it's really good when we can try to be open and share that with other people so they can maybe realize that it's going on in their own lives.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've come a long way. I can remember in college, starting to, maybe think like, okay, maybe this isn't my fault. Maybe there's not really something wrong with me. But, mentioning to a friend, like what I was struggling with my mom, and, and I was talking about my feelings and her kind of like chastising me a little bit, like, that's your mom. Like, how can you talk about your mom that way? And I was really taken aback, and it really made me feel like, oh, I can't share this with other people. And so I kind of stayed mom, or I wouldn't like bring it up unless I really knew somebody well for a while. But I also realized at the time that, people have a tendency to project onto other people, and that when she heard me talking about that, probably felt like she was thinking about her mom, and maybe her mom was very loving and very supportive and so forth. And, I don't think I had the separation or the perspective at the time to recognize what was going on. And I really kind of took that shame that she was like projecting at me. But I don't now. I mean, I know I'm a good person, and I know that I did not deserve to be abused the way that I was. And I also know that my mom, she didn't want to be that way. I don't think that she wanted to be that way, right? That was how she learned how to cope in her life. And it was very toxic. It actually doesn't help her get what she wants and what she needs. But it's really toxic for people around her. And, I just realized I came up with this like thing that I said to myself somewhere along the line. And I said, I didn't break her and I don't need to fix her,
Yeah. That's a really good way to put that. Yeah. Because it's never like it's anything that you've done. It's just part of who they are. They're not doing it even like out of a knowing place of like, I'm looking to hurt this person directly. Like nobody's doing that. It's just part of who they are. And sometimes you can't allow that person to continue to do to you what it is that they're just naturally going to do. You have to recognize that relationship's just not going to work.
Right. Exactly. It's going to be as much as I wanted to let my guard down and get close to her and feel, love, that I knew that she couldn't sustain that for any period of time, that if I allowed her to get close, or I got close to her, that eventually she just wouldn't be able to do it, that she'd revert to those, coping mechanisms. And I think sometimes she would there's a lot of real confusing stuff about, her wanting me to be, I was a high achiever in school. I just really liked school and did well and so forth. And she always sort of wanted to sort of take credit for that. Right. And there were certain things that I did that she like basked in. But then if there were things that she didn't understand that I was doing or weren't important to her, she wouldn't help me with them. She wouldn't give me support for it. She might even criticize some of the things. And that felt really dehumanizing in a way too, right? Invalidating that, the only things that were worth anything were the things that were important to her and that she could, get some glory from, which I don't really think that that's what parents should, I don't think that's what parenthood should be about. I think it should be really about helping your kids to grow into who they are naturally. So, and I'm a parent of 3 kids, and certainly I've had issues. You can't raise children without having issues. Sometimes I know I haven't done it perfectly, but I do try to sort of just create an environment where they're nurtured and they can figure out what they want to do, not try to push them in a certain direction or invalidate them if they want to do something that maybe I don't really agree with or I don't understand.
Yeah. And I mean, it's especially important because you've dealt with the trauma that you have in clearly a very positive way, and you've worked on it, that you get to approach, with your children from a place of understanding of, how certain things that you're doing. And I mean, like, I myself, I don't have children, but I've been doing a lot of, healing from a child perspective with my own family. So I can see from other folks who I've been talking with, like, it's just so important to recognize things in yourself as well that, you're picking up from that and make sure you're not projecting it forward onto other relationships in your life
Yeah, definitely. Well, and, one of the other things I found with my coaching clients is that a lot of times if people have, if they're having issues at work, that they've got, patterns that aren't serving them well, a lot of times it actually goes back, it can go back to childhood trauma. And, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a therapist, but when I'm working with people to try to remove obstacles between where they are and where they want to go, it's helpful to sometimes get at the root of, what's the belief that's holding you back from doing the thing that you want to do. And, sometimes it can be like, having grown up in extreme poverty and somebody who is like super driven to be financially successful in their career. And a lot of times they may, and it goes back to that, right? That maybe they grew up with a lot of instability and uncertainty, insecurity. And, they said to themselves, as a child, like, I'm going to get a college education, I'm going to get a good job, and I'm going to make a lot of money so I don't have to deal with this. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's great to have those kind of drivers. But, if that person gets to that point and they just can't stop working because underneath of it, there's still that fear of, insolvency or whatever, at some point it's important to like kind of look at, okay, what's this belief? What's the reality, right? Like, what's your bank account say, right? Like, or what did your boss say to you on your last performance appraisal, right? You're not going to get fired. You're doing fine. You've got lots of money in the bank. You're not doing the same thing that, your parents did when you were growing up in poverty, so those fears maybe aren't really founded. It's natural to have that fear because, they were traumatized, but they're also not helpless children anymore. They're adults who have control over their lives, and so sometimes like bringing those things together. And in some ways, that's kind of the process that I went through. I was like being, hyper vigilant and like, plenty of nice people came across, my path, but, and many probably potential friends, but I was sort of a closed book because I was fearful that person might hurt me. And I, over time, and honestly, I think partly because, my husband is very, loving, and he really reflected back to me that I wasn't like, I think I really thought that the way that my mom sort of like projected onto me, I thought that was sort of the real me. And, she thought that I was selfish and that I was, a difficult child and all these really crazy things that, if I look at what I really want, it's hilarious because I was like, I had a job, I was a straight A student, I was on the cheerleading team, I was on the tennis team, I was in the student council. Like, I was not a difficult child.
You have to look at the facts of what was happening and less about what,
Right. But, I remember one of the best compliments that he gave me was, he said, "Your mom doesn't know you." And I was like, what? Really? Oh, wow. You mean I don't have to look at myself through her lens? Mm-hmm. That was a really, really freeing thing. And then also he's very like friendly. And so I think just being with him and seeing how he interacts with people just gave me a good role model to realize that I could just sort of let my guard down and be nurtured by people's friendship and love, and not like feel lonely and in the corner and afraid to like open myself up and be known and be seen for fear of being hurt. And, the funny thing is that, sometimes you are hurt by friends that don't end up being the kind of friend that you were hoping that they would be, but it's not devastating, I think, in the way that I feared, because that wound that I had was pretty much the deepest wound that you can have. Like any friend that hurts you is never going to hurt you the way that a parent would in doing the things that my mom did. So, all of that is survivable, but I just didn't have the context for that whenever I was first getting out on my own. And I don't want to make it sound like I didn't have friends, but I just wasn't like outgoing. Like people would really have to like come up and be like, you're going to be my best friend. And I'd be like, okay.
Yes. Yeah. You need somebody else to come and let you in.
Yeah, exactly. They had to sort of pursue me and be like, I think you look like you'd be a good friend. But now I do that, so it's fun. It's great to like meet somebody and just realize that you've got something in common and just be like, hey, let's have coffee or,
it's a lot. Yeah. It means a lot when you're able to finally like open up and feel more like yourself. Yeah. When you recognize that for yourself. So, and I mean, definitely, like you said, with your husband, I mean, not necessarily always a partner, but just a friend. Sometimes it just takes that one other person to come into your life that's going to bring things into perspective for you. Like I know that with my partner, like he is, although not like he's very friendly, but he's very quiet and shy. And it was like seeing how my family interacted with him when they met him, because that's very different from how they are. They like to come in real strong and real hard at you, right? Which is, good and bad. It's overwhelming for a shy person like him. It just sort of like flips your perspective on what's going on in your life, and it just gives you a new lens to look through, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Terry, I think we can sort of bring things around here. The conversation has been absolutely fantastic, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. So why don't you let everybody know where they can find you and anything you'd like to plug?
Okay. Yes, I have a website, and it is terrybmcdougall.com. As I mentioned, I work with high achievers who are successful but not satisfied to help them be more effective at work, figure out what's next for them in their career, or if somebody's looking for a job, I will help them run a successful job search. I also have my book, Winning the Game of Work, and it is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I have just launched a podcast, which is called Marketing Mambo. And it has its own website, marketingmambo.net. It's on all of the platforms. And it's a show where I have I chat with marketing movers and shakers from around the globe. So I worked in marketing for a long time, and I would consider myself a marketing nerd. And so when I come across interesting marketers, I'll ask them to come on my show and talk about some aspect of their career or their experience in marketing.
Oh, totally. And I think that, coming from the hospitality industry myself, that marketing is everywhere and in everything. So definitely go give Terry's show a look. Even if you're not in the marketing industry, it's probably going to be very interesting to you anyway. So yeah, thank you so much again, Terry. Her book sounds fantastic. Her coaching, I'm sure, is wonderful, if our conversation's any indication. So definitely give her a look. Thanks so much for talking today.
Thanks a lot, Dottie.
Thanks again to Terry for being my guest this week. Links to her website and book are in the show notes, so make sure you pick up a copy of Winning the Game of Work, Career Happiness, and Success on Your Own Terms. that's all for this week, so don't forget to check us out on all the internet thingies at Sparkling Wine Pod. Links are all in the show notes. We're on Patreon at patreon.com/Sparkling Wine Pod, and please visit bit.ly/Sparkling Wine Guest to apply to be a guest on the show, or go to bit.ly/Sparkling Wine Stories if you want to submit a question or story to be read on air. You can find me everywhere at Dottie Champagne. You can find my dog, Duchess Mimosa de Champagne, on Instagram at Duchess_Mimosa_de Champagne. Thanks for listening. And hey, go look at some cute dog videos. You deserve it.